Hello, welcome back. Brendan Rigney here for another web-exclusive piece with my guest, Dr. Smith, who is going to attempt to teach me something called non-philosophy, taught by Francois Laruelle? Laruelle, or Laruelle, as the cool folk call him. So you're going to just try and paint, or you've already painted it, but paint me a picture of exactly what non-philosophy is, because that doesn't make any sense to me, so take it away, Dr. Smith.
Okay, so the reason why non-philosophy is hard for people to understand is, one, it's a weird term. It's weird in French.
Can you say it in French?
It's just non-philosophie. So it's easy to translate.
Okay.
But it's he uses the analogy with something called non-Euclidean geometry, and I know you all just tuned out at the word geometry. But all non-Euclidean geometry is it's normal geometry with two things in geometry changed. Okay, and so it's still geometry, but two of its fundamental axioms, so two of the things that found it, have just been altered. And you're like, I don't care about non-Euclidean geometry, but non-Euclidean geometry is what makes cell phones possible. It's what makes GPS possible, because some fancy math stuff. And so that's his model for what he means by non-philosophy. So it still looks like philosophy. It's just philosophy that's somehow mutated. And so it's trying to think differently than standard philosophy. And so what I've drawn here is a kind of model of standard philosophy. Okay?
Okay.
So, do I keep talking, or you want to?
No, you keep going. I don't even think I could put words together.
Okay. So in standard philosophy, a lot of times we think of breaking up the world. That's the first philosophical thing, is how do you distinguish things in the world? And so what philosophy does after Descartes and after Kant is it starts to break up the world into subjects and objects. Okay, so as this beautiful drawing, because I'm very talented, shows you, a subject is a person who's engaging with the world. And so in this relationship right here, you're a subject and I'm a subject. But for each other, we're objects. You know, so like I can't get inside your head, and so you're just like a tree to me.
I'm a tree to you?
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of my perception.
Okay. Well.
And so this creates all sorts of problems for philosophy. And so it's, well, what is the relationship then between a subject and object? Do real objects exist? Like, do you have existence outside of my just perceiving you? Are you just like here in my head? Is the tree just here in my head, and I'm projecting it out into the world? And so lots of philosophers come along and they try to figure out, well, how can we answer this question? Some philosophers, called phenomenologists, you don't need to know, but they're like, one way to answer this is by, instead of thinking about the tree, we bend the ray of attention back on itself. And so we're going to think about our thinking about things. Okay. And you know, that helps us for a little bit, but eventually it starts to get really confusing, and people make this look. And so what non-philosophy does is it comes along and it's like, well, let's basically just stop doing this. Okay, so part of what is assumed in that subject-object relationship is a relationship of transcendence. Okay, now I don't know how exactly to draw a diagram of non-philosophy. But it might look something. It might look something like this. Okay, so we have this guy who's a little happier. I don't know what that nose is. Who sees something akin to this.
So he sees himself looking at the tree. So he's observing his own observation?
Sort of. What he's observing is philosophy itself. Okay? He is now, instead of pretending that philosophy is something that you're just in, he sees philosophy itself as an object of study, as another object in the world. Okay? And so if that's true, and like that's Francois' working hypothesis, if that's true, then we can't explain this relationship between the non-philosopher looking at philosophy as if it's the subject-object relationship. because that would be to assume that philosophy is at play. Does that make a little bit of sense?
That makes a little bit of sense,
Okay.
a little bit, like a nugget of sense.
So the main thing that happens with this is like now, instead of worrying about whether or not you're real or not, because he's like, well, that's sort of childish games in a certain sense. And I mean, many people who take philosophy classes probably agree, though you should still study.
Stay in school.
Yeah. What that means is instead of like thinking like, oh, what am I? What are you? Blah blah blah. Francois says when we turn philosophy into this thing that we can study, it becomes a material, and this material is something that human beings can come along and use in our attempt to make the world better, I guess would be one way to put it. It's an attempt to, for him, it's an attempt to fashion a place where what he calls harassment doesn't happen. So that's partly non-philosophy in a whiteboard. I don't think I've converted you.
No, well, I'm gonna have to take a picture of this, and then possibly stare at it for the next 24 to 48 hours.
I mean, it's not very well drawn.
No, it's a beautiful masterpiece of a painting. Thank you for attempting to explain exactly what non-philosophy is to me. I do have a little better understanding of it. I hope people at home do too, because, wow, you're amazing. All right. All right, so thank you for coming on the show. I guess we'll see you next week for some more web exclusives.